but never losing sight of her vision, even when it was clear that there were many who did not understand the journey that she was on. So I speak the name Aminah. She was brave and she was fearless and strong enough to step into the light, making art from bottle gardens and bottle trees, and creating and inventing new art forms, rag-on-ons. And she left deep footprints, not only for others to follow, but for others to realize that they could craft their own path, even if there were others who did not understand the path that they were taking. So I speak the name Aminah Brenda Lynn Robinson, because she taught us that the search should always be for truth. And she herself believed it and lived it. She did it her way, never wavering, and even willing to make the ultimate sacrifice, the sacrifice of her life. She slept little, ate even less, and worked feverishly as if she was in a race against time. So I am honored to have called her my friend. Give me a minute. And I practiced this so I could get through it without this. So I loudly and I proudly speak her name, Aminah Brenda Lynn Robinson, and I celebrate her as I say, farewell, my friend. You will be remembered because there will be countless others who now speak your name.
I, like Barbara, may become teary, so excuse me. I'm Jules Garrell. My wife Judy and I were fortunate to have Aminah as a dear friend for many, many decades. There's no way in the time allotted to me by Carol that I could tell many of the memorable stories that I could tell about Aminah. But here are a couple of unforgettable anecdotes, and it's vintage Aminah. One afternoon, Aminah spoke at an event in this museum's auditorium. During the question and answer session, following Aminah's remarks, a little girl about 7 or 8 got up and said, "Miss Robinson, how do I become an artist?" And Aminah looked at her and said, "Draw, draw, draw." At the end of the program, Aminah, instead of mingling with the crowd, as the other speakers did, went to the little girl, took her by the hand, took her to the museum store, and purchased her a sketchbook and a pack of pencils. She handed them to the wide-eyed tot and said, "Now go be an artist and draw, draw, draw." I was lucky enough several years ago to be a member of a small group of Columbusites that traveled to Chile with Aminah for the opening of Aminah's art exhibit at the National Museum in Santiago. When we told Aminah that there was going to be a party at the home of a some wealthy art patrons in Santiago, and that we would pick her up and take her to the party that was scheduled to be given for her. She said, and I quote, "I'm not going to spend this evening with a bunch of fancy people. I'm going to go to a settlement house and spend some time with some beautiful children that I met earlier in the day." And Aminah said, "I'd always rather teach than eat." And now for a more personal remembrance of Aminah. 14 years ago, our son and his wife adopted a baby girl from Vietnam. I told you, Barbara, this time I would cry. To welcome her into our family, we bought her an unfinished wooden chest and took it to Aminah to decorate so we could fill the chest with items for our new grandchild with some family heirlooms and some rememberings of our family and our heritage. In a letter to our new grandchild, we wrote, Judy and I, and I quote from that long ago letter, "This chest was designed and decorated by a friend of ours whose name is Aminah Brenda Lynn Robinson. Through our friendship with Aminah, we have gained a heightened awareness of the promise of life, the strength of courage, and the richness of an open spirit." End quote. The finished carved and painted chest reflected Aminah's caring and diligence. She had done her research, and as Ramona said, she was very good at doing research. The chest depicted the country of Vietnam, the city of Da Nang, our granddaughter's birthplace, and then meticulously traced the long journey to her new home in her new country. Aminah's journey was not always easy, but her triumphs were many. Her body of work tells of the evils of slavery and racism and the challenges, joys, and importance of family and community. Anyone touched by Aminah and her colorful narratives comes away with a sense that her exquisite works will remain as a permanent billboard against the evils of bigotry and for the hope of a more civil world. That's Aminah's legacy. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Chief Baba Olugbala Shango Baidina. I'm the curator of the William H. Thomas Art Gallery. I, too, grew up in Poindexter Village. I probably lived in 5 different apartments between the age of 7 and 13. I first met Aminah, probably remember her, we used to hang out at Emerson Burkhart's house and help him get ready for the May show. And then I went away for about 10 years, New York, Boston, in Vista, learned community organizing. And when I was in Boston, I organized the musicians, and we had a coffee house. And I came back in '76, and I used those skills that Vista taught me to organize the artists in the community. And I said, we need our own gallery, and then we created the William H. Thomas Art Gallery. And at that time, Aminah was very much a part of that and encouraged us and guided us. And then in '75, we had our first art show at the governor's mansion called the People's Art Show, and she was very much a part of that. And then, and later on, she was working at Blackburn, and she informed me that I was an artist, and that was the first time I knew that. And then throughout the years, I became a wood carver, and many of the pieces that I carved, I would go to Aminah and take her a piece of barnwood and tell her a story. In about 3 minutes, she would take a magic marker and draw the story that I would tell her. And for the next year or so, I would carve it out. So if you come to our gallery, you see her impressions all over the place, drums that I've carved to tell the history of the galleries, or the African word for that is called patakees. And she helped with that. And then when she went to Africa, I gave her some juju, so if she got an accident, she would see the accident and she would end up back home. So I've had a long and meaningful relationship with Aminah, and I suggest with her house that we maintain it as it is, buy a few houses around it and tear them down, create a barn so we can do some artwork there, leave it so people can go in. And if I know it'll take a lot to maintain this through the years, but I'm willing to donate $10,000 if somebody wants to do that. Thank you.
On behalf of Congresswoman Joyce Beatty, there you go. She was to be here, and she was held up by work in Congress, and she asked me to say a few brief words. And I know that the Beatty family and Aminah go way back. And I'm sure that if Joyce were here, she would also express her feeling of the greatness of Aminah. Everybody here says such wonderful words about her, and everyone here's had a piece of her life that made our life that much better. And so on behalf of Congresswoman Joyce Beatty, God bless you, and God bless Aminah Robinson.
My name is Betty Stoll, and I just want to just give a few remarks about Aminah. Much has been written and articulated about her art, so I want to talk about her spirit. She realized growing up she wanted to be an artist, so she listened to a quiet voice that was speaking, singing, and whispering. The insights guided her with a gift of creativity. The wisdom of her elders gave voice to her family, an identity to the village, and its traditions and the community where she lived and the people she loved. It was her spirit that had a love for humanity and valued diversity, to respect different cultures. Her humble spirit multiplied friendships and relationships throughout the world. She had a spirit of passion and commitment to learn from the past, build on experiences, and walk in truth on the path of her life journey. Her spirit as a teacher and mentor encouraged and empowered young developing artists to shape the character of the next generation. She worked endlessly, making her art, telling her stories, keeping at it day and night, as if there were no tomorrow. Reflections of Aminah's true spirit was sharing her creativity, grounded in her history, family, faith, and belief in the ancestors. She never stopped seeing, and she never stopped walking. We will treasure her legacy that preserved the rich history, heritage, and culture that embraced her life with so much wisdom and knowledge. As we celebrate the life, art, and passion of Aminah, let us learn from the power of the human spirit. Just keep still. Take time to listen and hear that inner voice to make a difference and pass it on. Our friend Aminah walks with the ancestors, the great masters, and her loved ones. I believe she is looking down on us quietly, speaking, singing, whispering, just keep walking.
My name is Brenda Drake. My husband Michael and I are relative newcomers to this community. We feel so fortunate to have been able to meet Aminah. The poet Tagore said a century ago, "You cannot cross an ocean by simply standing and staring at the water. You cannot chronicle and celebrate and share a history and a community without being an active part of it." Aminah Brenda Lynn Robinson was an active and vibrant part of this community for her entire life. As it is known that art reflects the personal, political, and social circumstances of the artist, so did Aminah reflect the political, social, and religious fabric that defines our community. And she did this literally as well as figuratively. Figuratively, in the images of people from her family, from her neighborhood, from our families, from our neighborhoods. And literally, by using fabric from the people, from the community, from the neighborhood, to create her beautiful and transcendent works of art. Now, as you know, buttons feature prominently in her work. Last winter, when Aminah and I were riding together to her home, she spoke to me of the importance and the meaning of buttons in her work. Buttons, she said, are history. They reflect the people who touched them, the people who used them. And so when we look at her work, we can think of the buttons, each one of them, as being something special that was handled by someone over and over again as he or she put him or herself together to go out and face the world. And now, Aminah has used those buttons, those artifacts, those handled pieces, to create a reflection of the history of the people she depicts, which is, in fact, the history of all of us. And Aminah's work showed that she also thought in a very profound and intense way about our origins and our roots as a society and as a nation, and how we here in Ohio are tied to the freedom part of slavery, and how we, through slavery, are tied to the motherland of Africa. And her work reflects that movement across continents and oceans and across centuries from so long ago to the present moment. And finally, Aminah's work tells us a story and teaches us about ourselves. She was a painter,
a sculptor, a builder, a storyteller, a historian, a social scientist, and a friend. Aminah was a part of the glue that held us together and defined us as a community. The poet Elizabeth Alexander says about Black artists that in some way, spoken or not, they contend with death, race against it, and write among the ghosts whom we call ancestors. She says, by making art, we feed the ancestors, leave water and a little food at the altars we have made for them, and let them guide the work. We listen, we hasten to create. Through Aminah's magnificent body of work, to which she gave her life, work that is beautiful and captivating and complicated and yet so approachable, she draws us in and connects us to her world, the world of the ancestors. Through her artwork, which is timeless and everlasting, so is she.
Aren't we lucky to have heard a group of people up here today share what they shared? Thank you, everybody. So much eloquence and so much love and so much appreciation for the way that Aminah's work changed us, changed the community. The great power of art, I guess. I got to know her right when I came to Columbus, and that was in 1978. So we shared a lot, just like we've heard so much sharing earlier today. And I loved what Wayne said about Aminah seeming to be so fragile, but having so much steel inside. In the early 80s, or mid-80s, I had a studio in New York that I would go to from time to time. And I overlapped with Aminah when she was at PS1. And so when you're in New York, you learn that one of the ways that artists connect with each other and with dealers is they invite people for studio visits. And so I went to see Aminah at PS1, and then she was going to come down and see me in Tribeca. And I said, well, Aminah, do you want me to come get you? She said, no. She said, I can ride the subway. I'm not afraid. So she shows up at my studio, and she's kind of all wrapped up, and she's got this satchel. I opened the door, and first thing she says, can I smoke? I said, yeah. So she's lit up a cigarette. And then she opens her bag up. And I said, so you made it all right? The subway wasn't too bad? She says, I wasn't afraid. She said, I had protection. She opened up and she had her Chihuahua boo-boo. And then she reached a little deeper in the bag and she had a pretty good-sized kitchen knife. So, yeah, you didn't want to really mess with Aminah. She, gosh, one in a million. So I guess what I'd want to say in closing, other than, again, to thank the speakers for their extraordinary openness and sharing, is to really recognize, there was I looked around the room today, and this is a plural room. And I know that when I came to Columbus, this was a pretty Eurocentric place. This particular place. And I ended up working here for 10 years, from 88 to 98. And, not starting, but certainly urged on by someone whose name you don't hear a lot, but Mary